Hi. So, at the time of my recording this, I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to post this on my YouTube channel. You see that? Anyway, as private as part of a video journal, or if I'm going to share it publicly. Today is July the 14th, and it's about 7:50 p.m. on a Wednesday. And you know what? I'm totally going to share this. So right now I'm sitting in my bed, like no makeup, but I don't care. I'm not trying to impress anyone. I'm not trying to set up a facade of beauty that I can't maintain. So it's just me in my PJs. Au naturel. So many of you know that I recently traveled to Turkey and that it was a life-changing trip for me. And I have had a lot to process since I've been home. I've been home maybe a week and a half. And I can thankfully say it's a lot to process because it was so good. It was so good for me personally. I faced my greatest fears as I traveled alone. And I really met myself. And I couldn't be more proud. After this trip, I decided to really work on the debilitating anxiety that I have struggled with since I've been about 19, 20 years old, and I'm 42. And so in an effort to do that, I got a book called Becoming Bulletproof. I'm going to try to keep this simple. This is Becoming Bulletproof by Evie Poumpouras. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name correctly, but she's a former CIA agent. And the title of the book resonated with me, and I knew that she was a former CIA agent, so I'm like, yeah, she's probably got some amazing stories to tell about how she conquered her fears. And so the title Becoming Bulletproof really resonated with me. And as I guess many of you also know that I consider myself to be a Christian. I'm not a fundamental or a conservative Christian. But I'm very much in love with the Lord Jesus Christ. And I can say that with a great deal of authenticity and truth because I have fought a huge battle spiritually for my faith. And that's something I can get into a little bit later. But I'm finally in a place where it's more authentic and genuine and powerful. So, the purpose of this video is to share my reflections in a summarized version. And you are not going to believe what I'm about to summarize. On page 28 in this book, Evie talks about facing your fears, and she talks about different scenarios of fear, such as people's fear of flying versus getting in a wreck in a car. We understand that statistically speaking that being in a car wreck is much more likely than being in a plane crash. I don't have a fear of flying, like, at all. I used to get super anxious going through airports, like, insanely so. And so Evie made this statement, and she said, "My intent here is not to make you more afraid of driving, but to get you to reflect on those things that you are most fearful of." Number one, as a person who has suffered with anxiety, you know, if you're this kind of person, that your mind already does enough of that, right? And so it's scary to me to think about that. But she talks about reflecting on what you're most fearful of, assessing why you're afraid of those things, and looking at them logically rather than enduring a clouded sense of dread amplified by sensationalized stories. And so I really related to the part that says just enduring a clouded sense of dread. When you have anxiety and your adrenaline is going, you get brain fog, right? It's super hard to think clearly. For me, it is anyway. And all I can do is just feel the fear, as articulate as I am. Also, many of you know that I'm a poet, I'm a writer. Language is my thing. I'm a word nerd. So for me, when I feel such intense pressure, and it gets to the degree that I'm not articulating and verbalizing those things in my mind, I'm just feeling through them, that's a lot of pressure. If it's to the point that I can't articulate it or verbalize it in my own thoughts, it's a big deal. And I get tired. I got tired of feeling pressure. And so I decided to sit down and journal. I've got a separate journal just for this book. And I originally titled the page, like my first page, I titled it Reflections on Istanbul Airport. That airport is massive, okay? Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But I flew out of the Atlanta airport. If you've been there, you know it is or was at one point, the biggest airport in the world. But Istanbul Airport has expanded, and it is much, much more to traverse than is Atlanta. So I originally titled this page Reflections on Istanbul Airport, and I wanted to reflect on the fears that I experienced while I was in that airport, because I got lost. I don't speak much Turkish. I was alone. I have health issues that sometimes I fear can limit me, such as sleep apnea, right? So for me, missing a flight and being in an airport that is overseas, it's so much more complicated than just, oh, I missed my flight, I'm going to crash here on these seats beside these people who seem nice, and, I'm just going to go to sleep. I can't do that. Number one, I have issues with my sleep because of trauma. It takes me hours, and that's with medication, that's with meditation, that's with mindfulness, that's with affirmations. It takes me a long time to feel safe enough to fall asleep. And as an adult, I can only sleep beside my nieces. They're the only ones that I could sleep beside. My cousin and my grandmother too, but it's hard for me to feel safe to fall asleep beside of anyone because of what I've endured. So there's that, and then there's sleep apnea. So that would mean I would need to plug my CPAP machine in order to fall asleep safely, physically. And over there, even if I could find a port to plug my CPAP in, they're all European style, and my converter was in my luggage, so I wouldn't have been able to plug my machine in. So, and then on top of that, you know, I have dealt with anxiety, and so there's this complicated cloud of things that I have to deal with that the typical person doesn't. And I rose to the occasion in spite of that. As I reflected on what I faced in Istanbul airport, I missed my flight, like I said, and I couldn't read the signs well enough to understand if there were going to be any other flights going to Antalya, which was my ultimate destination while I was there. So I had no idea if I would still have another opportunity to get a flight or if it was going to be the following day. I couldn't figure it out. No one could understand me whenever I would ask them questions, and therefore I never got the same answer twice. And there was a gentleman in the airport. Well, I'm not really going to call him a gentleman. There was a man in the airport, and after and here's another thing. I had my carry-on luggage with me that weighed about 20 pounds, no wheels, so I'm lugging it on my shoulders. Once, you know, I'd like put it on this shoulder, it'd get tired and chafed from being rubbed raw, then I'd put it on this shoulder. You know, then I finally just drug it behind me, and I'm like, it's going to rip open. My bag's going to bust open right here in the airport, and then I'm really going to be in a pickle, so I was super nervous about that. So while I'm there, for one thing, the tickets that they printed for me did not have my gates listed, so no wonder I couldn't find out where I needed to go. For another thing, after I had just had enough, I just broke down crying in the middle of the airport. And finally, this one guy, he offers to help me. And he's like, follow me. I'm like, well, nobody else is telling me what to do, so what choice do I really have? And all this time, these horror stories, once this guy kind of gets engaged with me, starts flooding my mind, you know. The horror stories that you hear in the media of, you know, Americans going to different countries that are of different religious, that have different religious values, that have a different culture. And so, you know, some negative voices were kind of playing into what I was experiencing there. Like, you know, somebody's going to take advantage of you. They're going to human traffic you. They're going to kidnap you. You know, all these horrible things that you hear about, which in reality is not nearly as predominant as we hear. There's many more good experiences than there are bad. Many more wonderfully safe experiences than there are bad. And that's reality. So this guy is like, you know, follow me. And I'm like, okay. And he takes me all over the airport. I'm going from one end to the other. I had to pay money to change my flights, which I was low on funds. That was another thing that had me freaked out, because I'm like, if I get stuck and I don't have enough money, I am really screwed. So there was that. And I'm following this guy, and we get about, I guess at this point, it's like halfway through to the gate that I need to go to. And I had to go through all these different security stations. Even though I have global entry Like, it was bizarre. And when we get almost to where I'm supposed to be, he gets right up in my personal space and he says, I help you, you help me. And that terrified me, because I knew that there was an obligation and pressure. And I just told him, I was like, I don't have it. And I was crying. He turns around on his heels. He's like, follow me. I didn't know where I was following him. But I just kept going because I didn't know what else to do. Okay, so then we get to this one particular customer service station. And I'm there trying to figure out which gate that I go to. And there's a young man that walked up. He heard me speaking English. He is from Turkey. And he just takes it upon himself and starts translating. And I felt so much peace. I'm like, oh, okay, I think this guy is... Like, the other guy was helping me, yes, but I didn't know what the cost was going to be if I wasn't able to pay him for helping me. It was just a huge risk. So this other guy starts helping me. And I could just sense his spirit. You know, you can pick up on the vibrations of other people. And I could sense that he was much more of a good Samaritan, you know. And he starts translating, and he just takes my tickets and he's like, okay, I think you're going to be close to where I'm going to be. I think you're going to be like the same gate. And so he helps me. This guy kind of takes over, and the other guy, he just kind of disappears, which I'm thankful, because he did get me so far, you know. And then this other guy takes over, who's just a passenger. He wasn't like an employee or anything. And he helps me find my gate. He helps me carry my bag. And so we get to the gate, and we're sitting there, and I finally was like, okay, nobody's really listening to our conversation. So I just told him, I said, I am so thankful that you helped me, because that other guy, you know, he got in my face and he was like, I helped you, you helped me. He was very, very serious with me, you know, kind of like borderline aggressive. And so I was like, I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful for you. And so the guy was like, you know, people just need to be good humans. And he was so encouraging. And I would not have made it to my gate had it not been for this young man. He was very much a protective force for me there. So there's way more to this story that I'm just not going to spend the time sharing, but here's what I wanted to do. As I reflected, like this book said, and I thought about going through Istanbul airport, by the time I got to Antalya, here's what I had endured. I had been awake for about 36 hours. With very little to eat, because my nerves just would not allow me to eat. I couldn't force it if I tried. I probably wasn't hydrated. Like, I tried to stay on top of my water intake and my hydration packets. But my mouth was crazy dry because I was so nervous. So there was that. And then I'm hauling this 20-pound duffel bag from one shoulder to the next. You know, I'm enduring this semi-shady character of a guy as a single woman in a foreign country. And I'm fighting, you know, anxiety. I'm fighting the stories of, you know, the negative voices. But there's just so much more. But I said all that to say this. The question that came to me was, well, then what do you fear? What have I survived? Istanbul airport was the single crowning event that pulled everything else that I've survived in my life together. So here's just a rundown of it. I have survived prolonged, severe childhood neglect, abuse, and trauma. One of my mother's boyfriends picked me up by my throat when I was about 12. I think because I had my music too loud and I was being mouthy probably. Like, I think I told him I didn't have to listen to him because he wasn't my dad. And he picked me up by my throat. I have endured seeing my mother die from overdose probably a dozen times. When I was 13, I carried her out of a movie theater in my arms from where she had overdosed, and she was pronounced dead in front of me. I laid her on a popcorn counter, waiting on paramedics to arrive for her. I've witnessed her death several times. I saw her beat to death once. She had bled out in shock and her jaw was shattered, and I don't know how she has survived it, but I have endured a lot of shocking, traumatic events from the time I've been born. At the age of 4 years old, I was waking myself up for Head Start. I would set my alarm. I would get up, I would dress myself, and then I would walk to school. Thankfully, the school was just like at the end of my driveway. It wasn't very far, and it was super level. But at 4 years old, that's a lot. And when I would come home, I would stand in a chair and wash dishes, and then I would take my bath. She would run my bath water, but other than that, I provided for myself from the time I've been 4. And then my grandparents, thankfully, I started living with them at about the age of 6, and I started first grade. And then, of course, from first grade through high school, it was a lot of just abuse from being close to my mother. She never physically abused me. She never hit me or anything like that. It was the people in her life. It was the overdoses. It was the neglect. It was just her not being in a good place to be able to be a parent. And I do want to interject right here. As I share my story, which I'm probably going to do in the coming days, I'm probably just going to kind of roll it all out video by video. I do want to interject, number one, that I have healed my relationship with my mother. I don't want anyone to hate her. I don't want anyone to resent her. She has been through enough. And so that's the last thing that I want for her. She is, as far as a human being goes, she has the strongest will of anyone I've ever known. She's extremely brilliant. She's very feminine, very whimsical, very interesting. And when she's sober, which is more often these days, she's so much fun to talk to. She's got a great personality. So as I share my personal story, I do want to make that clear. I don't want anyone to have any hard feelings toward her because she has endured enough. She's been through more than she should have ever have gone through. A lot of it she put herself through. But none of us are perfect. And like I said, I've healed. I've had a lot of therapy, and I'm in a much better place concerning my biological mother. So I've endured that. I have, and there's so many events. Like, it's so easy to just say, oh, I endured childhood trauma and then pass to the next thing, because it was 18 years worth. And then I got married, and it's tough. Isaiah 54, there's a portion in Isaiah 54 where there's this scenario where it appears like God was mad for a season at some woman. And then he calls her back as though she was a woman who married early in her youth only to be rejected. And that would probably summarize my marriage. And so here's what I want to say about that. Number one, I don't want anyone hating on my ex-husband. He's a good man. He's a good man. We just weren't good together, I guess. And he did ultimately reject me, which left me to be the one to do the leaving. So I don't know if it's just a case of falling out of love. I'm not really sure. I just know that at some point in the marriage, he just didn't want me anymore. And I think he very much resented me because everything that he did for me, he made sure that I understood, oh, I did this for you. Like, I felt like a total inconvenience all the time. And because of my sleep issues, like, he didn't approve of how I slept. And so I suffered constant daily harassment about my sleep. It was nothing I could control. But to him, because I didn't work between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., that made me somehow lesser than him. Now, I could get started at lunch, and I could work till midnight, 1, 2 a.m. But for some reason, that the schedule, like, he prioritized a morning person. To him, they're more valuable, they're more reliable, they're just better people in general. And so I lived under constant disapproval and harassment about that. He never accepted it, but we eventually just stopped talking about it. So I don't want to go into a whole lot of details about my marriage. I'll just say that we are friends, and he is a good man. And I'll tell you this, here's how trustworthy this man is. You could leave that man with $10 million and you could say, don't touch a penny of this, and he never would. He's a very good steward. He's incredible at the work he does. He's extremely talented and gifted. He's just really, really good at what he does. He's a carpenter, and I don't know anyone who does work like he does. He's excellent in what he does. So I said all that to say this. As I share my story and I share about the hardships with the various characters who have been in my life, I don't want any animosity toward any of them, because I hold none. I hold none. I am reflecting on my journey. I'm in awe of my survival skills, and I appreciate the lessons learned and the person that I've become through these trials. I have survived the threat of death, like literally being murdered. This is a huge story right here I'm about to tell you. Huge. So when I was, how old was I? I told you about my mother being basically beat to death. A man beat her face in with the butt of a gun and shattered her jaws and her chin. And that was when I was, I guess I was about 14, maybe 13, something like that. Probably 13. I don't think I had gone to high school yet, or maybe I was in my freshman year. And obviously the man disappeared. No one could find him for years after that. Fast forward to my senior year in high school. A new girl comes to school. I make friends with her. And one weekend she says, I'm having a party. My parents are out of town. There's going to be alcohol. I want you to come. I'm like, game on. Let's do it, yo. So I go to her party, and I'm there early, and it's just me and her younger stepsister. And she says, my stepbrother is on his way. He's bringing the alcohol. And I'm like, all right, sweet, you know. I'm standing in the kitchen, and in through the door walks the man who had beat my mother almost to death. I knew in that instant that if he knew that I recognized him, it could be a very dangerous situation. At the age of 14, 13-ish, that was a very traumatic event. And now as a 17-year-old, I don't know, maybe I was 18 by that point, 17 or 18. I had to immediately make sure that my expression showed no hint that I recognized him. All I could think about was how I was going to play it cool and get out of there. So she's like, hey, this is my stepbrother. And I'm like, hey man, how's it going? All the while knowing he's the man who tried to murder my mother. So they're pouring drinks, and I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, I'm not drinking a drop. You know, I've got to figure out how to fit in here and appear like I'm cool and figure out how to get out of here. So they started pouring drinks and turned on the music, and I started dancing. And they're like, hey, why don't you have a drink? Why don't you have a drink? And I'm like, I'm good. I'm going to drink here in a little bit. You just wait. I'm going to drink. Just give me just a little bit. Well, while I wasn't drinking, they started getting hammered. And her younger stepsister, she was probably 14. She was super young. And they were drinking, and she was getting drunk. Well, all of a sudden, the phone rang, and that girl got on the phone with her mother, and her mother found out that she was drunk and that we were all there alone. So she, in turn, calls my friend's parents, who are out of town, rats us out, and tells us, you know, they tell us we're on our way home. We can't believe, I'm not going to say his name, bought you alcohol. And, you know, we were just in huge trouble. Now, here's what went down after that. Number one, this guy, he had to have at least feared that I might recognize him. Number two, he was guilty of providing alcohol to minors. And then there's a whole lot of other details I'm not going to go into right now. But let's just say he was a wanted person. So I guess because of all that, this is why they did what they did. We decided to leave the house and go sit over by the lake because we knew that the cops had been called, and we were just going to kind of hide out over there. Now keep in mind, I've not drank anything, not a drop. So I drove his car with him and her and the younger stepsister. We all went to the lake. We sat by the lake till probably 4:30 in the morning. Then we was like, okay, we're going to go back, make sure the coast is clear. And then I thought, when I go back, it's going to be closer to morning, and then I'm going to start calling people to see who can come get me, because I didn't have a car. I was just like 17, maybe 18. So we get over back to her house, and they decide that they're in so much trouble that they're just going to run away to Georgia. So she's in her room packing her clothes, and I'm sitting in the living room in a recliner. While I'm sitting in that recliner, the man comes up and stands and pins me to where I can't get up out of the recliner. And he's, they're all wasted, and he's looking down at me. And he says, "You really don't know, do you?" And I just looked up at him. I was like, "What?" He said, "You don't know." And he started laughing. I said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "You're drunk. Get away from me. I don't know what you're talking about." And he looks down at me and he goes, "You're so lucky." And I knew in that moment, had I give it away, that I knew exactly who he was. He would have killed me because he was already in trouble. He was wasted, and he had clearly demonstrated his ability to attempt murder. So I've survived that. I have survived health issues. When I was 29, I know I'm jumping around all over the place, but I have to get this out. When I was 29, I had been in church for several years at that point. I was a preacher. I was preparing for a Sunday morning service and fighting the typical, what do they call it, stage fright, because it was just a real struggle for me. And is it any wonder, my God, look at all that I'd been through. At this point, and I can say this just as of tonight, July the 14th, I really have stopped faulting myself for feeling anxiety, because who wouldn't? Who wouldn't feel like they have a completely frazzled nervous system? Who wouldn't? So here I am at the age of 29, and I had been preparing for a sermon, and I'd been having like panic attacks in my sleep. I would wake up just with the most ferocious fear, and I'm like, why? I'm sleeping so deep. Like I don't remember dreaming. I just remember sleeping so deep and so good, and then just going from a deep sleep to instant horror. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. So my ex-husband, my husband at the time, he's not, this is again not to damage his character. This is just naturally who he is. He can't help it. He is not an empathetic person. If someone is sick, it makes him super uncomfortable, and for whatever reason, he distances himself from people who are sick or experiencing disability. It's just something that makes him uncomfortable. He can't help it. So I had been waking up, and of course I'm telling him something's wrong. Something is wrong. And on this particular Sunday morning, as I was just kind of opening my eyes, just kind of starting to get awake, I knew something was bad wrong, because my heart was beating so fast. It beat so fast, I didn't have the energy to move. The only movement was my heart. Like, it was just insane. And I knew something was really, really, really wrong. And as I'm experiencing that, he walks into the bedroom and he's like, "Get up." And I was just like, "I can't." And I just kept saying, "Call an ambulance. Call an ambulance." That's all I could do. And he's like, "If you'd just get up, you'd feel better. You need to quit laying there." Like, laziness was like a big thing for him. Like, if anything appears lazy, then, like, he attacks it. Because he's just a very on-the-go kind of person. And so I'm laying there, and I knew I was dying. And I told him, I said, "If you don't call an ambulance, I'm dead." And I said, my heart And so he goes and gets this heart rate monitor. And when he takes my pulse, it was 187 beats per minute. And at that point, he panicked. And then he called an ambulance. Thank God. Well, I was took out on a stretcher, and on the way to the hospital, I think my heart rate came down to like 145. And then when I got into the ER, I was laid back. My heart rate was in the 120s. And every time they would try to elevate me, it would shoot back up into the 160s, and we couldn't figure out why. I just now reflected on the words of the ER doctor. Anyway, I'll tell you about that in a second. And so, you know, they were like, do you do drugs? Do you do street drugs? Because I think that they suspected like maybe I was on some kind of speed or something. I was like, no. I was like, I'm a preacher. I was like, I'm supposed to preach this morning. I'm not into drugs. I don't do anything like that. And so they gave me some medication. My heart rate for that day never came down below like 120. And I don't know, they just couldn't figure out. This is like the first episode, right? Of this that had happened to me. That was this severe. And as I was leaving, the ER doctor pulled the curtain, and he did not have a good bedside manner. Like, he was just not a nice person. And he says, "Ma'am, I don't know what your problem is, but you're going to have to get your nerves under control." I wasn't acting out. I wasn't like thrashing. I wasn't being combative. None of that. It was just my heart rate. I guess in reflection now that I have integrated so much and been through so much, I can see that that was the case. And so here I am at 42. The time on my timer just said 42. That's interesting. Having survived all these things and more that I've not even included in this video, but I will. And I'm so proud of myself. When I went through that Istanbul airport alone in another country, I don't know what it is about that trip, but it has brought all of these other crisis events together into focus. And I'm drawing even now such confidence and freedom because I have finally met me. I have finally tapped in to this massive amount of resilience that I didn't know I had. I am strong mentally. You would never know these things about me unless you see this video. You would never know these things about me. I'm mentally strong. I'm emotionally strong. I'm physically strong. I am balanced. And I'm beautiful. I will never, ever, ever disrespect or think poorly of my appearance or my physical capabilities again. Knowing what I've survived, there is nothing that can be said about me physically that is not beautiful. And that's something that I want all of you watching this video to know as well. You are so much more than meets the eye. You are so much more than you realize. You have untapped reserves of resilience that you're not even aware of. We as humans, it is the year 2021. There is nothing that has been thrown at us that we have not absolutely conquered. There is nothing that the human race has not been able to endure and survive. The march of humanity is staggering. We have subdued everything: viruses, wars, cultural shifts. We have endured and conquered and innovated every single thing. Every single thing. There's not one thing that has stopped us. There is nothing. There's nothing that can stop you. You need to know that. My stomach is growling. So anyway, I'm going to stop here. I'm 46 minutes in. I'm super nervous about sharing this, if I'm honest, because it's so deeply personal, and I super don't want other people to get hurt by what I've shared, because I love them. I've integrated all my experiences, and we're all good. So that's part of my story. I can't believe it's only part, but it is. So, cheers to me. I love you guys, and I love me. Bye.